What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a little bit of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 news, or at least of sorts, as it concerns the developer, the Chinese Room, going independent. Now, while this is not necessarily a story that I would have covered generally, as it's not just normally the kind of thing I enjoy covering, the reason I wanted to go over this specifically is because I think at the heart of this might actually lie the reason that Bloodlines 2 was delayed from the first half of 2025 to October. And to that end, this video is going to be pretty much divided up into two parts. The sort of factual thing that has happened, and then some speculation on my part towards the end, which we will obviously get to. But first up, if you're unaware somehow, Bloodlines 2 has had a very troubled development, and as a result of that, after numerous delays, a developer shift, it getting pushed from the first half of 2025 to October of this year was hardly much of a surprise to anybody, I imagine. But what was curious about it in particular was that when it got delayed to 2025 to begin with, it was mentioned that the game was basically done and that what they were doing was polish, which was fine, but then they gave that exact same reason when they pushed it to October, which is when it started getting a little bit strange. Now, just yesterday, from the time of this video, the Chinese Room, the developer, of course, behind Bloodlines 2, but other titles you may have heard of, such as Still Wakes the Deep most recently, but also stuff like Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, Dear Esther, and Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs. Now, prior to yesterday, the Chinese Room was owned by a company called Sumo Digital. Sumo Digital is one of those games companies you probably haven't heard of in and of itself, but they own and are involved in a lot of stuff you probably don't realize, namely things like co-development or contract work, essentially, where effectively they will help other game studios that hire them to do whatever it is they need done, usually things like art. And for a while there, what Sumo Digital was doing was owning a couple of studios who were actually making their own games on top of some of this co-development work. Back in February of this year, 2025, Sumo Digital announced that they were going to be focusing pretty much entirely on the co-development side of things and stepping away from making full games themselves, which is interesting because if you're unaware, they actually also owned the studio behind the recent Bolt Gun series, which were a pretty big success, and they've also done a variety of work on a bunch of games I've covered previously, like V Rising, Wildermyth, Chernobylite, Nightingale as an example, so they get up to a lot. But again, they were going to focus on co-development. The Chinese Room didn't really want to do that, obviously, as they had apparently been working on something unannounced in terms of original IP, and obviously Bloodlines 2. Now, to be clear, nowhere in there was Bloodlines 2 in danger, it would seem. They had an agreement with Paradox Interactive, obviously, as a partner, and it looks like that just would have been the last thing they did before focusing on co-development. But obviously, the Chinese Room didn't want to do that, and thus initiated a management buyout so they could go independent. Now, as a result of this, the Chinese Room did lay a few people off. It is not disclosed exactly how many or anything, and all they were willing to really say was that their current headcount is 55. Now, that's pretty much the factual side of things, but why am I covering this? Why does this matter? Honestly, pretty normal corporate stuff kind of thing to happen. Well, the reason I wanted to talk about it, and which is where we enter the speculation side of things, is I think this very likely provides the reasoning for the October delay. So, as I mentioned, when the game was initially delayed to 2025, that's when they originally mentioned that the game was pretty well done. They were just polishing things. And yet, in February, Sumo Digital announced this push to just focus on co-development, and then it was actually in March of this year, towards the end of it, that the October delay was announced. So my thinking here is likely what happened is that the Chinese Room got this information when actually we don't want to do that, and then initiated the management buyout, or at least, agree to sit down in talks, which is likely the cause of the delay. Because if I had to guess, given I would say the honestly pretty thin reasoning that accompanied the October delay being that, again, the game was basically done and they just wanted to continue bug fixing and stuff, I bet the actual reason is that they could not discuss the situation surrounding this, and likely still can't to some degree, I'm sure, but obviously wanted this resolved before the actual game released. So now that they are independent, it's very likely that everything's sorted out in terms of who gets what is owed to who, that kind of thing is clearly set in stone before the game launches, and that way it's not up in the air, which is, at least for their sake, I hope what happens. But as I've already stated, that is basically just an assumption on my part. I think that is likely what probably could have happened here, but obviously we'll probably never know for sure, given the way that nobody ever wants to actually talk about these things until it's 20 years later. I just read this story, and I just feel like it kind of immediately clicked into place for me. And yeah, sure, maybe I'm off base, maybe it's incorrect, who knows, but an interesting thought nonetheless. But in either case, right or wrong, the fact that the Chinese room went independent in the middle of all this, I think, is just yet another fascinating turn in what might be one of the more interesting developments of a game I have ever seen. I've talked about this in, I would say, most videos. I've mentioned Bloodlines 2 in at this point, which is that while I am cautiously optimistic, especially given the recent hands-on previews they did with like IGN and PC Gamer, that it's probably not going to be like a complete train wreck or anything. But the catch there is, even if it was, no matter kind of how this game turns out, I am just along for the ride at this point. I am so curious to see how this game pans out, because what just an insane story of twists and turns. The fact that we might actually get a playable game at the end of this is honestly in and of itself remarkable. But normally, this is the part where I would tell you that, if you want to see more of this, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. But the catch here is, this is kind of different from my normal stuff. I just thought this was an especially interesting turn in the story here. But this isn't really the kind of video I usually make. With that in mind, though, I will absolutely be reviewing this game when and if it actually drops. And as a result of that, if you want to stick around for the reviews, certainly feel free to do so. But that is gonna pretty much do it for today. Certainly hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.